You're watching Station Zero.
I was 21 and had just become a police officer and was also recently dumped. So my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old and a new cop, I had the I'm invincible and I can take on anyone mentality. I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league female. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at the stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. So, the night came, I was excited, and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field, and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then, the van started driving towards us, and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car and I'll go say hi. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car and I walked up. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what's going on and if he could back his car up a little bit. He was very polite and he said he was the owner of the property and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he's been having trouble with poachers on his property and just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him that we only came to look at some stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that and he told me to have a nice date and drove away. After that, the girl was texting non-stop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car and I moved it into a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to hit my car. She hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was fucked. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied, obviously. He then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me that they had a gun, and to give them my money and truck and I won't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I said no. She started to cry and said they didn't want to hurt me. He then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and to lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911, tell them my name and badge number. I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatch the best directions I could to this field. All the while, the pair decided to flee. Again, with my stupid young cop mentality, I chased them. I took off after the man, who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops and saw muzzle flash. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and my field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and didn't give me any shit about it at all. The most used words were dumbass and stupid fucking rookie. I hopped in the car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they start getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found meth right on the center console and searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car. They let me out and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale and looked horrified. I went to the back of the van, where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out that it wasn't blood. The plates had been stolen, and the van was a reported stolen vehicle. I still get shit about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. I will never use online dating again. This happened in 2011. I had just gotten out of a rough relationship a few months prior to this happening, and my friends encouraged me to try dating again. So I caved and made a profile on the website Plenty of Fish. I was surprised with how many messages I'd received within the first few hours. Most were just people saying hi or asking to hook up. I wasn't really looking for a hookup, so I ignored those messages. After about a week, a guy, roughly an hour away from me, messaged me. He was cute, so I messaged him back. The conversation was pretty casual at first. He asked if I'd like to go for a coffee sometime. Not thinking anything of it, I said sure. This is where it started to get weird. He started to get pushy and asked when we could grab a coffee. I told him I didn't have my own car, so I'd have to borrow my mom's car to meet up with him. He offered to come pick me up, but I wasn't comfortable with the idea. The next message made my blood run cold. It read, "I'm sure your hometown isn't that big. If I knocked on a few doors, someone would be able to tell me where you lived." "Are you crazy?" I replied. "I'm sorry, but that's kind of creepy." This just pissed him off. He messaged me multiple times after this. They said, "You know I have a gun. I could shoot you and make you disappear. No one would look for you. You're nothing but a dirty slut. I could kill you. I'll throw you down a well and no one will ever find you." I was really scared at this point, so I asked him to please leave me alone. He replied with the following, "I know where your hometown is. It's not a big town. I can find you." At this point I'd had enough and I blocked him. I reported his account to Plenty of Fish and deleted my account. I was really on edge for the next few weeks after the fact. I was afraid he was actually going to come and look for me. So, to the creepy guy who threatened to kill me on Plenty of Fish, let's not meet. Ever. This story kind of creeped me out. It happened about 9 years ago and sometimes comes to my mind. So, I was on an adult dating site, one of the fetish types, I know, don't judge me. I was just looking for some fun. Anyway, I was stupid and gave out more information than I should have. I was chatting with a guy. He had asked me at some point what I did for work. At the time, I was working at a McDonald's, so I told him. He asked which one. I stupidly told him which one. We were chatting on and off. We hadn't really been chatting for too long, and I stupidly gave him my phone number at some point. He would talk about how he wanted to meet me on my break and have some fun on my break. I told him no thanks, I don't bring my lifestyle to my job. Anyway, so I checked my messages just before I was due to clock out of work. I'm glad I did because he mentioned that he was at my job and he told me what he had ordered. I was like, okay, well, don't expect me to do anything with you, I'm not interested. He then got upset and wasn't accepting that I wasn't interested, which also scared me because I had sent him a picture of my face, but I never received one from him. I really wasn't too interested in him, so I decided I didn't need a face picture since I likely wasn't going to meet up with him. His interests weren't what I was looking for, and I have a hard time straight up saying I'm not interested, and I just slowly start to ghost whoever I'm not interested in. Now, luckily, I hadn't told him my work schedule, so he didn't know that I was about to clock out. So after I clocked out, I told one of my managers that I was on a dating site, and some guy had just showed up at my job, and I have no idea what he looks like. I said that I was going to hang out in the back in the break room for a bit. Luckily, she didn't judge me and was just like, okay. So, I waited about half an hour before I left. I didn't have a car at the time and had to walk home, and I was afraid that he would see me and try and come pick me up in his car. Luckily, no one followed me, so I was in the clear. I don't think he ever messaged me again, or I ended up blocking him or something. I don't know if this is really all that creepy, but it creeps me out to think that some random guy just decided that he would show up at my work and expect me to want to meet up with him. So yeah, now I just give out vague responses as to where I work. I don't work in the same town I live in, so it would be hard to pinpoint my exact location. This opened my eyes and made me more aware of the information I give out to strangers. So, creepy guy, let's never meet. When I was 20 years old, I worked as a delivery girl for a pretty popular pizzeria in my area. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but when the guy who delivered for the night shift ended up getting fired due to him losing his license because of a DUI, I was placed on the night shift since my boss hired a family friend who could only work my shift for whatever reason. I really didn't want this shift because you never know if people who order late at night actually want a pizza or if they have other intentions in mind. Unfortunately, my boss was an asshole and essentially told me that if I wasn't willing to work the night shift, then I was fired. I wasn't exactly in a position where I could be out of work, albeit temporarily, so I reluctantly worked the shift. The first month of this shift went by without any issues until I had to deliver a pizza to a house that just barely made our delivery radius. I punched it in on the GPS, and the house was located in a pretty suburban part of the city. I arrived and it's about 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, decently lit, and mostly littered with modern townhouses, but the house I delivered to was a duplex. I rang the doorbell and waited for about 30 seconds. No answer. I ring it again and wait another 30 seconds. Still no answer. I'm standing there getting pretty nervous that something's about to go down, but thankfully a man opens the door. He looked like he was in his late 40s. He was pretty tall, maybe a little over 6 foot, and he was very skinny. I tell him his pizza's here and he just stands there, staring at me. I asked him if he was okay and he responded by saying, "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I got off work not too long ago and I'm zoning out a bit." Fair enough, I suppose. He hands me the money, I hand him the pizza, and as I'm making the change, he says, "You're really beautiful, you know that?" Not really thinking much into it, I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his change. I said goodnight and he did too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later, I get a delivery order to the same place. I head over there around the same time as last time and ring the doorbell. He answers the door very excitedly and says, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and can't wait to go home, to which he chuckled and says, "I know that feeling pretty well." He pulls out his wallet, and as he's counting his money, he asks me what my name is. Being kinda tired at this point and not really thinking straight, I stupidly tell him my name. As I'm making change, he asks if he could have my number, as he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as I am. Whoa, buddy, pump the brakes. I've literally only met this guy like twice to deliver a pizza. I had no idea who this guy was, and I'm positive he barely knew who I was as well. Another thing to mention is that I looked way younger than I was at the time. I was told by numerous people that I still looked like I was 15, and I was hoping he thought differently and wasn't hitting on what he thought was a teenager. I'm just standing there awkwardly for a few seconds before I muster out, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He gets upset and says, "Oh, okay, I see." We stood there in silence before I told him to have a good night and walked back to my car. He says nothing and still stands at the doorway, staring at me, until he finally went back inside once I started my car. I got a pretty creepy vibe from this guy, and even brought it up to my co-workers, and they agreed it was pretty creepy. Except for my boss, who overheard everything and claimed I was making up stories and trying to gain sympathy for having to take the shift. Fucking asshole. A few weeks later, as I'm working the night shift and we get an order from the same guy again, and this is when shit finally hits the fan. I arrived at the house around 10:30 p.m, and keep in mind that from my perspective on the road, it didn't look like a single light in that house was on. I got out of my car and walked to the front door with the pizza box in my arms. As I'm approaching the door, it quickly swings open to reveal the man, except this time he was wearing a suit and I jumped back. He laughs and said, "Sorry if I scared you. I saw you out the window and figured I'd just open the door now so that you wouldn't have to ring the bell." I was getting scared because, as I mentioned before, there were no lights on in that house, so was he sitting in the dark this whole time? And if so, why? I nervously laughed and said, "It's okay." He asked me if I liked his suit, to which I said yes. He then asked me, "Would you like to go on a date with me tonight?" What the fuck? I once again tell him I have a boyfriend, to which he chuckles, gets close to me and says, "Honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl. He grabs the pizza box from me and throws it to the side and grabs me by my arms, hard. I'm officially shitting bricks at this point and trying not to cry from the fear that was overwhelming me. I start pleading with him. Dude, please, I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight. He just stares at me with the most sinister look I've ever seen on someone's face and says, I don't care. Get inside, now. We're gonna have a good time. He starts trying to pull me into the house, and I'm trying to resist as hard as I can. After a bit of struggling, he lets go of one of my arms and starts grabbing something out of his pocket, which I presume was a knife. I did something that, to this day, I'm still thankful worked. As he was doing that, I used my free arm to punch him as hard as I could in his stomach. This stuns him for a few seconds and he loosened his grip on me, allowing me to break free. I quickly run to my car, and as I get in, he runs at me and tries pulling me out of the car, holding the knife in the other arm, and he yells, Why are you making this so fucking difficult? I grab a half-empty soda bottle I had in the cup holder and throw it at him, and luckily it hits his head and he lets me go. I slam the door, and then all of a sudden, he jumps right on the hood of my car and starts scratching and banging on my windshield with his knife. I put the car in reverse and quickly backed out of the spot and quickly reversed down the road with him desperately trying to hold on. He's banging on my hood screaming, Stop the fucking car! I turn onto the next road as swiftly as possible and luckily he falls off the hood of my car. I slammed the gas as hard as I could to get as far away from that sick bastard as I could. In my panicked state, I drove a couple blocks down the street and kept making turn after turn onto other side blocks as I feared I was being followed. Eventually, I reached a red light and slammed on the brakes and just sat at the intersection, frozen from what had just happened. I began crying and violently shaking as I was sitting there. It dawned on me that I came so close to losing my life, and I couldn't help but feel like I shouldn't have been alive. Once the light turned green, I pulled over to the side and just sat there crying. Eventually, I get the energy to drive back to the pizzeria, and almost immediately after I walk in, my coworker knew something was wrong after seeing me. I practically broke down in front of him, and everyone else came to the front wondering what was going on. I fought my tears and explained everything that had just happened. My coworker comforted me, and my boss surprised me and began apologizing profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the cops. They arrived at the store and I gave them my statement, as well as taking pictures of any marks on myself as well as scratches on my car from the encounter as evidence. My coworker followed behind me as I drove home, and I collapsed on my bed and strangely enough, I managed to fall asleep. I quit my job the next day, and luckily a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a new job at her clothing store. As far as psychos go, 2 days later, I received an update from the police. The entire duplex was owned by this guy's brother, who lived on the right side of the duplex with his wife, and this psycho lived on the left side. I learned that he had been in and out of jail constantly, at first for robberies and assaults, but later on it was for sex crimes. He had been released from jail about 5 months before this encounter for having sex with a minor. When they arrived at the house, he was long gone, and his family had no idea where he ran off to, but the police insisted they would find him. And indeed they did, albeit not alive. I spent the next 2 months in fear that he would find me and finish what he had in mind, but the police contacted me and updated me on the case. Apparently he fled to another city nearby and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone late at night on the street. Luckily somebody happened to be looking out the window at the right time, called the cops, and the police caught him trying to force her into his car. He managed to flee and the police chased after him. He blew through a red light at a busy boulevard and a van slammed right into the driver's side of his car. By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries, while the psycho succumbed to his wounds long before the ambulance even arrived. I thanked the officers for everything they did and for informing me, and I walked out of the station. I lit a cigarette as I walked down the street, attempting to take in everything I was just told. I don't wish death on people, but after hearing about his death, I felt relieved. I felt relieved that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I was relieved that I would never have to encounter him ever again, and that I wouldn't have to go through with charging him and reliving what happened that night. My last experience 2 years before this was scary, but I think this one takes the cake as being the scariest, as I was alone and face to face with this psycho. Who knows where I'd be if he managed to pull me into his house. Nowadays, it's so easy to connect with someone. All you have to do is pick up your phone, download an app, and boom, now you can see all the eligible bachelors in a close radius without even getting out of bed. But just a year ago, something happened that changed my mind about online dating forever. I was 21 at the time, and getting a bit tired of the mundane life. I was scrolling through a popular dating app, and that's when I saw him. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed, pretty smile. Perfect. We instantly matched and agreed on dinner and cuddles at his place. Yes, I know, never go to a stranger's house on the first date, but I was trying to score a home run, if you know what I mean. I showered, slipped on my favorite pair of matching knickers, threw on a big t-shirt and shorts, rubbed on my favorite perfume, and I was out the door. When I pulled up to his 3-story townhouse, I thought, his living arrangement seemed to match up with his line of work, so of course I had no doubt that he was who he said he was. I went up to the front door and knocked. About 15 seconds later, the most handsome man I've ever laid eyes on opened the door, and instantly we connected. We dated for about 4 weeks when, one day, he looks over at me and says, "Can I tell you something?" "Well, of course, babe," I quickly answer, eager to hear what he has to say. He looks me dead in the eyes, straight-faced, and says, "When I saw you on that app, I planned on killing you." His hand reached over and caressed his mine. But then I changed my mind. Chills went down my spine as I knew he was not joking. Completely paralyzed in fear, I just stared at him. I was unable to speak. I couldn't move. He moved in closer and says, "Babe." And that's when I snapped out of it. I grabbed my purse, ran out of his house, blocked and deleted his number, and quite frankly deleted the whole app. So hot guy from that dating app, let's not fucking ever meet again.
If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And turn on the bell to be up to date on our latest uploads. And remember, don't change the channel.